The company I work at, Cerner, was an early adopter of Teams. We've been in it for well over a year now. We have switched completely out of Skype for Business and into Teams for our meetings. We've mostly moved out of WebEx as well. And as we all got into Teams and started getting up and running, there were a lot of things that I just kind of noticed you could do to help yourself stay organized. Some common pitfalls, some integration points to just kind of highlight. So what I wanted to walk through with everyone today was really sharing how I stay organized in Teams and how I use what my workflow is to make sure that I'm not losing files, that I'm not losing information, and that I just have some general best practices that help. And you'll notice I'm a super formal presenter. Nate, how do you want to handle questions?
Let's go ahead and just attendees, if you're comfortable, go ahead and unmute yourselves whenever there's a pause, if Tara asks for it, or if there's just a lull. And we'll also be watching the chat. So if you're more comfortable typing those in, you can feel free to use that, and we'll be watching that as well.
So without further ado, let's jump into Teams. So a little bit about me. I am actually not from a technical background. My code knowledge tops out at HTML, although I'm teaching myself some R for fun. But I am really spend a lot of time talking about how does information get places and how do we stay organized with communications information at a company. And in many companies these days, what communication tools do I get? The answer almost always is, well, here's Microsoft. So as a result, I have been a very heavy user of Microsoft for as long as I can remember. I am a lifelong Mac user. I'm actually doing this presentation on a MacBook, but I have to say that Office 365 has won me over, and I am something of a Microsoft fan now. They've really done a great job at building new integrations and just making everything easy to use and functional, logical, adding things that users want for the most part. Sometimes they, still add some things that just are cool, shiny tech toys. But it's really been a exciting thing to watch as a user, seeing them go from really cumbersome products to things that you can kind of just jump in and start understanding immediately. My current role, I am, a lot of IT departments say, oh, go talk to the business. So I like to say that I'm Tara, the business Saylor. And I am that person who is kind of their counterpart on the business side, who is talking about our processes and what we need the technology to do and working with them to make sure it's possible. So like I said, this session is how to stay organized and efficient as you start using Teams. And so for starters, Teams it's kind of like Outlook plus SharePoint plus Skype for Business all smushed together into one interface, and ta-da, what you have is Teams. And really, this is what it looks like. And since we're all having a meeting in Teams, I know you've seen it before, but it reminds me of Outlook in that it becomes that one place that handles so much of what your work is every day. And you end up spending a lot of time in it. When I come in most mornings, I open Outlook and I open Teams and I check for the updates in both of those just to see what has happened. So one thing that we will not really talk about is the fact that there's this thing called Slack that has been very, very popular throughout the business community. And Slack is, you can see it in the background. It looks weirdly like Teams. It's strange. A lot of the functionality is the same, but a lot of the Teams originated from just Microsoft wanting to have a Slack competitor. And it's become a pretty robust product. And I think they were taking away market share from Slack. What no one has said is it because, Slack was shadow IT and Microsoft just gives you Teams if you're already in Outlook, so here you go, or was it actually that people wanted to use Teams? But there's a lot of similarity between the two, particularly around the persistent chat and threaded conversation. So one of the things that we had to work through for delivering guidance and governance is there are a lot of different ways you can get in touch with somebody through various Microsoft platforms. There's SharePoint, there's Teams, there's Yammer, there's Outlook, and those are kind of big, heavy hitters that you can use. So really how we've thought about it around our company is SharePoint is where you do your heavy lifting for file management, your heavy workflows. It's kind of that backbone behind everything. It's also where you build websites. So if you have information that you want to publish, and yeah, you can have comments, you can have likes, you can have recommends, but it's not really collaboration. It's more one-to-many communication. So that is what we've been doing in SharePoint. Teams has become where we get together to work with a specific group of people on a project. And a lot of times that's people that you work with regularly, or it's a project team that you spin up and have people from different parts of the project. For example, I'm on a team right now that is including people from HR, communications, and our internal IT group as we are getting ready to rebrand our intranet. I was on another team for a big announcement that we were doing that had, just entirely different people I'd never worked with before, but it really gives you a central place to work together. Then Yammer is really what we use it for is either really, really, really big teams that are more like departments, or to talk around more of topics. So if Teams is all about getting work done together, Yammer is kind of connecting with each other to find information. And that can include things like we use them for some of our different big campus events, or we use it for parking and the things that you just want to share with everyone. Another thing that we do a lot with Yammer is troubleshooting. Our Office 365 team actually has a very active channel where if people are stuck on different things, they can post their questions, and then everybody in the company can help answer, whether or not they're part of that official support team. And then Outlook. When Microsoft was first introducing Teams, I heard them trying to say, like, email's dead, they're going to get rid of it. And I laughed really, really hard because I can think of people who will, like, you can have my email when you pull it out of my cold, dead hands. But what email does is it's great for things that you can forward. Teams, by design, only lets you talk to people within a channel. So if you need to contact someone you don't work with regularly, if you need to have information that needs to be shared really broadly, that's where Outlook tends to be really, really good. And the other thing email is great for still is, if we had to join a separate team to find out everything that's happening at Lawrence SharePoint, and then for, KC SharePoint and Omaha SharePoint, and, we had to have a separate team for all of those to check, you start to feel overwhelmed really quickly. Whereas if everyone sends you an email, hey, it's all in one place. Any questions on kind of how we frame those up? Excellent. So let's get into the meat of it. Let's get to the anatomy of a Teams. And I never know, Teams to me is like fish, only the opposite. Like, fish is always singular or plural. Teams always has the S, whether you're singular or plural. So Teams really has 4 big navigation areas. The first of it over to the far left is what you call apps. And that lets you get to things like your Teams or chat or meetings or phone calls or your files. If within the Teams app, you open up what are called teams. They went all out on the naming there. And those are those different groups that you belong to. And they're kind of like project, you would say like, oh, here's my project team, or here's the team I'm a part of. Within those teams, you subdivide into channels. And channels tend to be, for example, if you have one of my projects is the Intranet project. We have a channel for meeting updates. We have a channel for communication planning. We have a channel for governance documents. We have a channel for development tools. And that kind of just helps you keep the conversation a little bit sectioned out so that it's easier to follow pieces of it and different team members can engage as needed. And then across the very top is what they call tabs. And tabs are kind of like shortcuts. They're a quick way to reference important pieces of information that you share in with a channel or with the whole team. And I'll share a little bit more of some of the cool things you can do with it, but tabs serve as connectors. They use webhooks, and the number of connectors that you can build in is just endless. There is very little that you can't connect into Teams if you want to, using the connectors and the tabs. So as you're in Teams, as with a lot of other things in Microsoft, those three dots are going to be always a menu. So if you're ever looking for more options, or you want to get into configuring things or get to a menu, look for those three dots, and that will let you jump in and configure. This particular team that I used for a screenshot, I'm actually just a guest in it, not an owner. So I've got just an abbreviated menu. I don't have all the options I would if I was an owner. If I were an owner, I would have more, I could control who can see things. I can control who would post in different teams. And that is one thing that Teams does very well, is it really gives you the ability to, it pays attention to your permissions and shares content accordingly. So here is really, after a year, what I figured out when it comes to Teams. You create a new team when you have a new group of people you want to collaborate with. So if you have an entirely new project and you don't work together on a regular basis, and you don't have an existing kind of cadence or place where you collaborate, that's when you want to create a new team. However, if you want to work with people that you work with on a regular basis, and you have a team where you're all members, that's where you would want to do a new channel. And then finally, you would use a new tab to call out important information, kind of to pin it or to bookmark it for all members of that team and channel. And then this is one of the exciting new things that they just announced at Ignite, which was that just last week? But my slides were done, and then they were not done because they rolled out so many things at Ignite. They're getting ready to roll out private channels, and your IT administrator for your tenant is able to decide whether or not they can be used. I don't have the full story, but there's some concern about not, how do you manage those? How do you govern those? Because they are private and they are locked down. But what they're really good for is, like in this example, if you had a budget, well, not everyone on the team necessarily needs to be paying attention to or accessing all the budget information or files, but there could be a subset who need to talk about it. And instead of having yet another team you have to keep track of and yet another team to manage, you can just use a private team to keep it all in one place. Other strategies I heard is, if you've got a whole team and then there's just a group of people who are managers within that giant team, maybe you'll have a separate manager thread or something like that. Most people I've heard are very, very excited about private teams, and I can definitely see how they would be useful to have. So before I get into what to do with your brand new team, any questions? Nope. Okay, cool. Um,
Oh,
so,
hi.
oh,
Oh, sorry about no, Tara. Actually, it's not a question, but speaking of the private channels team, I'm not sure if you saw it. Christian, Christian Buckley shared out a blog post from Nicole Enders about use cases for private channels and teams. Relatively recent this week, the 10th of November, and it was a pretty good blog post about you know the the appropriate
functionality.
scenarios. Yeah.
Oh, I'll have to go look that up because,
I
yeah,
c- yeah, I could put it in the chat, but Nate, I don't know if you're aware the chat isn't locked down.
Oh,
Like there
all
is no
right.
chat.
Well, that's interesting. I'll look into that. Thanks for letting me know.
there's,
Thanks. So I would have put the link in the chat, but it's not there. But it's Nicole Enders, or if you follow Christian on LinkedIn, he posted it. So
perfect. I will have to go look for it because, yeah, they seem like they're very exciting. But of course, until you kick the tires, you don't know what you don't know.
right, yeah, and the thing with the private channel, from what I heard, is one, it doesn't create an O365 group. It's not tied to a group, which sort of makes sense.
Yeah.
And only members of the current team can be added to the private channel. And it does create its own SharePoint team site.
Oh boy, more sites to keep track of.
So I guess it goes back to governance, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it seems like it has a real good use. Yeah.
Um, I was on a call with at Point. They were doing this about the teams, private channels, and they have purposely removed them from the SharePoint admin because they don't want users messing with them. And so they're kind of hidden from the admin view.
Oh, like within the admin panel?
Right.
Huh.
They want them only managed in Teams, and they don't want them managed through that. He said if you use some like PowerShell and scripting, you can see them, but they don't want them in the admin because they shouldn't be managed there. They should be managed in Teams.
The face I'm making is laughing at all the admin loops that you can go into, all the panels. And, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it works out. Okay, so and I think actually this conversation made me really happy because the best part of the SharePoint community or Teams or Microsoft or anything is the fact everybody hears something a little different and learns something a little different and then shares it back with everybody else. You know, especially on these new features, everybody is learning together. Okay, so I'm guessing that this is something that everybody knows, especially because it sounds like most of you have some familiarity with Teams. But the first thing I tell anybody to do when they're getting into Teams, Yammer, a new anything is go and set your notifications. And I know a lot of people who are still getting email every time there is any kind of update or anytime they get something in chat, and then they're complaining about how they get too many notifications. So this is kind of 101, but it is really a good first step for your users is to make sure they put notifications.
I kind of wish Microsoft would allow admins to set the default on this to make it less chatty, and then users can go in and make it more chatty as they want.
I would love that.
Because my users have complained that they're constantly getting notifications from Teams, and so yeah, just a default of a less chatty one, and then they can increase it as they need it would be a better solution, I would think.
I wonder if there's anything about that out in Office or in user voice. I think I might check that out, because I agree. Like, the default of notification sound for every call, mention, chat, like, holy cow, that's a lot. Or missed activity. And I agree that I'd rather the default is the other way. I will check user voice, because I'm very curious now. And again, this could be a little bit elementary for this group. If you're using Teams all the time, it is all about the threaded chat. And this, though, is my favorite trick within Teams, and it took me an embarrassingly long time to find it, is if you click on that little A at the bottom of a chat, you are able to actually format your text, you're able to add links, and you're able to hit return without it automatically sending. And that was, like, of everything I've learned in using Teams, that was the game changer for me, was that little A. And it seems simple, but I still run into people who aren't aware that you can do it, and it makes such a difference. What I did also notice as I was posting these is they pushed out some new features. Post in multiple channels, again, I think they told us it was coming. It wasn't a total surprise, but I was not expecting to see it when I was doing screenshots for this presentation. And then the other one that was interesting was everyone can reply, or only you and moderators can reply. I was not entirely sure how I would use that within the team, because most of what I do in Teams is collaboration. I'm not sure how I would use that, but I could think if you had a fairly large team and you just needed a general announcement or update, and you didn't need, it wasn't so much something that needed conversation, it was just a FYI and you needed to reach people there. That's where I can see that being a useful function. And of course, the best part of Teams is the fact that you can communicate in GIFs. And while I was putting this together, I was making GIFs of GIFs. So that was just like my moment of total meta-ness. And I believe that your administrator can turn all of these off as well. Our administrators did not, I think, because they wanted to play with GIFs as much as anyone. But if that's not your company culture, it can be turned off. And coming soon, you're going to be able to pin teams. This was something that I was so excited to see. Right now, you can kind of drag and reorder teams, but there's a lot of like, okay, wait, crap, I know this team is in here somewhere. Where did I put it? How do I find it? And so this is something they announced at Ignite that I think got lots of cheering. This was, when it comes to having another conversation option, is you can talk on specific documents. So you can actually have the conversation right beside the document you're working on. The catch for this is traditionally, every time I did it, I would lose that conversation thread. I would forget where to find it. But what was really exciting, I just found this, is they're now pulling that conversation from your document and pulling it back into that main channel, so it's easy to find if you're just scrolling and looking for reference. Chat is really the update for now that they're not doing Skype for Business anymore, as that's been sunset. This is kind of that IM solution, and it is a persistent chat. You keep your conversation thread. We did find out that if you can chat with either one person, or you can pull a whole group in, you can chat with 3 or 4 people. But if you add people to an existing chat, your conversation thread will disappear. And so if, for example, I've been talking to Nate and then we circle someone else in, the conversation that Nate and I are having will not appear to that new person. It becomes a new chat. And that, I think, is actually a very useful thing because, it protects the privacy of whatever Nate and I were talking about. We've heard some complaints across Cerner where we're not able to export these as easily as the Skype for Business was. And for example, our help desk got in the habit of they would troubleshoot by IM and then they grab the conversation and just save it for their documentation. Well, there's not an easy way to do that within Teams. It's saved, but you don't have that kind of quick grab and paste. Also, you are able to change how long the persistent chat is saved. And our lawyers would like that to be a very short window, whereas, the users are saying, can I keep it a while because I never know when I'm going to need to go back. This was, I think, the other thing that you heard cheering from all over the world is Popout Windows were announced at Ignite. And that is, I think, going to be that was one of my biggest frustrations with Teams is you would be chatting with someone, you'd have to change to look up information, then you'd lose the chat, you'd be jumping back and forth. So this is really, I think, going to be a huge new valuable feature as it's rolled out. So one of the other things that Teams does that you can share files in Teams, but the catch is there's been a lot of like, oh, I put it in Teams, and just like, oh, I put it in SharePoint. Once it's in Teams, you never find it again. As a default, any files that you share within a channel or within a channel are saved to that channel's file tab. And the problem is it just saves them all in one big long list. So you end up having just this massive list of files with no sorting and no metadata, and you have to go digging through it trying to find it. They did earlier this year introduce the ability to create folders in Teams, which made it a little bit easier. But of course, we were all told, like in all of our Microsoft training, not to use folders. You want it to be flat and you want to use metadata. So the best workaround that I found are two things. First, upload the file where you want it to go, and then get the link and save it to the conversation, as opposed to just loading it in the conversation window. That way it's living in the place that you want it to live. And so the other thing that I think is really an important trick, especially if you're going to have a lot of complex information that you're saving, or you have, I've seen groups that have extensive SharePoint infrastructure. So really the best thing that I found for if you need to do metadata management, if you have additional information, is do your organizing in SharePoint and do your heavy lifting and structuring there, and then add it back in as a tab by a connector to either your document library or list. And here's an example of one that I've done. And this is actually in Teams. It's a screenshot just of the Teams. But you'll see it looks just like any other SharePoint list with tags, the metadata management. You can interact with all of those different pieces. And you can sort, you can filter all within Teams, but you can't actually create a list like this without going out to SharePoint. So that has been, I think, from a just, if you have a lot of data you need to handle, if you have various, tagging and metadata management, that is still the workaround that I recommend. I heard that they are going to put more metadata in the next iteration. That's another thing that's coming, but I don't know what their definition of more metadata is compared to some of the extensive things that I see SharePoint list power users wanting to use.
One other issue with that I just came across today, had a user that was trying to upload more than 10 documents at a time in Teams, and Teams said it wouldn't let him. But if you go into SharePoint, you can upload as many documents as you want at a time. So, yeah, so Teams has a limitation of 10 in the application.
And just for I hadn't run into this, but Teams will have a limitation of only letting you put 10 files at a time, whereas SharePoint, you can grab the whole folder. I have to say that the jumping between Teams and SharePoint is pretty much the only reason I'm still using Internet Explorer. And I may be the last person on earth who's still using Internet Explorer. I did get Edge Beta downloaded today. I haven't played with it enough to know how it works, but being able to click open in SharePoint and have my files there where I can do whatever heavy lifting I need to do has been worth putting up with IE for me.
I'm waiting for the Chrome Edge to have the Internet Explorer integration to do it. I'm using Credge right now for my main browser, but I use Internet Explorer for the SharePoint things. But I'd like to see it when they have the Internet Explorer capability to it, because that's going to be nice to integrate that.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you. I don't know if your mic volume is.
It might be. It's kind of buried here.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
It sounded like you were saying that you're with me on you can't wait till Edge is fully functional and can get rid of IE.
Well, the idea is that they're going to, from what I understand, integrate Internet Explorer in the Edge, the new Edge. So for any compatibility issues, you could still use Internet Explorer, but it'll be in Edge.
Oh, okay. So it'll be, yeah, you'll be able to use Edge, but if there's some kind of weird, you can kind of open in IE using Edge.
Right, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and you can already do that with the Edge beta. It requires group policy though.
Okay. I can't believe I'm excited about something in Internet Explorer. Like if you had told me 10 years ago or even 3 years ago, I'd be excited about a Microsoft browser. I'd be like, no. And now I'm like, oh, I can't wait to see how that works. So how life changes, right? The other thing that the way that you're able to do that SharePoint linking is through something called an integration. And it's kind of, I think it's built off of webhooks, and it functions where you basically are able to pull in that information for a ton of different apps and have it right in Teams. And I think the idea behind that is then you're not trying to bounce between multiple browsers, or if there's a form that you use all the time, or there is, your team uses Trello or any of these other devices. And I think that's one of the things that is going to make Teams adoption broader. You can't do anything quite like this in Outlook. For Outlook, you still have Outlook, and then you have whatever browser you're using, and Teams is kind of smushing that all into one place. Yeah, there's integrations for Jira and Yammer and Trello. I do not get why they're doing so many integrations between Teams and Yammer. I'm like, it just feels like they're like, you can chat in Yammer in Teams, and you can chat in Teams and Yammer. Like, okay, now you're just kind of showing off how many applications you own. But it's really a convenient thing. Again, system administrators can control what gets turned on and what does not. And at Ignite, they talked a lot about no longer Flow, but now Power Automate, which will how closely Power Automate and Power Apps are going to integrate into Teams. Again, I haven't played with those enough yet to really see how that's going to work, but that can make, it seems like that'll take Teams, really you can turn it into a place where you can get all your work done, as opposed to just a place you talk about the work you need to do and then jumping over to other places to do it. I kind of laughed as I was putting these slides together about how to make calls in Teams and how to have meetings in Teams, because obviously we're having a Teams meeting. I can safely assume you've all figured out how to at least do a little bit of it. One thing I did really like, though, is if you are not sure how your audio is going to work, if you are not sure how your microphone is, you can actually do a test call, and it'll let you do that either in the settings piece or before a meeting. You can record it. You actually call yourself and leave a voicemail, and you can just hear how everything works. So if I were trying to use Teams for something, a very important CEO meeting or something, that's definitely a useful thing that I can just make sure, okay, my audio is good, my speakers are good. Teams meetings. This has been our replacement at Cerner. We've moved out of WebEx and are almost exclusively using Teams meeting. You can still call into those by phone, or you can join over your laptop. Mostly we're having people join by laptop because that we get some cost savings that way. But for a conference room where you have a speakerphone, instead of trying to have everybody talk into one laptop, you are able to join by phone. So that has been. There was some, just general, oh man, I got WebEx, I finally figured it out, and now you want me to go to Teams. But generally, it was a pretty easy adoption. And everybody has gotten used to, just like you used to have a Skype meeting or a WebEx meeting in Outlook, you can just create a new Teams meeting, or you can do it natively in the Teams app. Yes, so this, I was laughing. I'm like, I'm going to have a video of me talking on a video. But one of the fun things about Teams is they let you have some blur and control of your background. And, oh, okay, that was too much video. What you were supposed to see was me doing the blur background feature. And Nate, maybe you need to talk for a second so everyone can see your nice blurred background.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so I don't know if everybody can see the little thumbnail down there, but I've got the big, blurry shelves back there. Hopefully you can see it.
Yeah, that's a really nice feature if, for example, you are talking from your home office / spare bedroom and you don't want to have everybody looking at the Jar Jar Binks mug behind you. Bonus points to anyone who actually saw that. Or, for example, you're in your kitchen and it's very busy behind you. So they're also going to be introducing a new feature where they let you upload a custom background. And we are torn between excitement and horror for what that can mean for the company. On one hand, it's going to be a lot of fun. We think, like, I'm so looking forward to the first time I join one of my, my intranet meeting and I'm like on the beach or in outer space. On the other hand, we're really sure that somebody's going to get inappropriate. So unfortunately, there's no way to police it. Then this is the other thing that this is another thing that I think is a really great function, and they are doing live captioning for meetings now. And that is really useful, one, for anyone who has hearing impairments or is in loud settings, but also if you have people with different language proficiencies, like English is not their first language, sometimes having those captions can just be enough to help make the meetings more effective. One word of caution with captions for live meetings, we discovered that Microsoft Captioning, while it is very good, it does not necessarily think about context. And you can indeed drop the F-bomb and have that show up in Microsoft Captioning. We found that out doing a stream video of our new chief HR officer. She has a bit of a Minnesota twang, and it did not recognize what she was saying. So I would say, one, it's a fantastic, fantastic function. And it is really, I think, from an accessibility standpoint, a win. But do be, cognizant that it is real-time computer assisted. this is something that has been a real, this is like what you were saying about why do they make all the notifications as default on to make it noisy. Every time you join a meeting, it is going to default to having your microphone on and your video camera on. And we don't know why, because the last thing you need is to accidentally send a video of, it has really happened where someone was sitting in his hotel room at night, didn't know he had his video camera on, and is running around without a shirt. Fortunately, that was all he took off. But, that really happens if you're not being careful. They've started rolling out something where you can have call hosts and participants both. And that way, participants can't do everything that the hosts can. But right now, for anything with more than five people participating, you can mute other users. Or if you are one of the hosts of the meeting, you'll still be able to mute other users. And that's really good, just in case. What we get a lot of is people multitasking, and they'll be talking, and then they'll stop talking and they'll start typing and not realize that they're getting picked up by the microphone that's tucked right by their keyboard, and it makes for some very loud meetings. So that is definitely a function I was thrilled to discover. Share your screen. And again, this was one I kind of laughed while I was putting the slides together, because obviously you're seeing how I do it. I do like that it gives you a lot of choices. Do you want to share your first screen? Do you want to share a specific app? Whenever Nate and I started this video call, I almost forgot to close LastPass in the background, so that would have been awkward. It kind of gives you a second to think about what you have open. The catch on this is every time I try to stop sharing, down at the bottom, I see this big red button, and I think that's going to stop my screen share. No, that hangs up the whole call and kicks you off. You're looking for, I think it's this little button beside it. I've got a little button that looks like my screen, and it has an X in it, but it's right beside the big red button. So that is like my productivity tip of the day, is don't push the red button for a change. Microsoft does let you do, they call them live events, but you can actually prep them in advance. And it gives you what is called a producer panel. And it lets you have some extra functionality around the live stream. It lets you have the ability to cut back and forth between graphics in the speaker, and it gives you some more control of the Q&A panel. It gives you the more ability to kind of mute all the, have everybody muted in advance versus coming in loud. One caution I would have for this, they say there's 3,000 attendees in this collaboration best practice live stream. I don't think our IT live stream team would agree that 3,000 people should be using Teams at a time. They tend to say a couple hundred go crazy with Teams, but when you start getting to the really big events like our town halls that we live stream, they're still using, I think it's Wrapup that we use, but before you think, hey, run with this and invite 20,000 people to a Teams live stream, do some testing and make sure your network is up for it. It seems to be working well with groups in the hundreds and low thousands I've seen us do, but really, really big groups. And it may not even be Teams in that case. It could just be your, every company I've seen that is trying to stream video to people within the company has to just do some bandwidth optimization. And so this is kind of a bonus feature in Teams. I don't know how many of you have seen Shifts, and it used to be a standalone app whose name is escaping me, and it kind of got eaten by Teams. And what it lets you do is literally do all your shift planning within Teams, and you can have it set up so frontline workers can clock in and clock out from their phones via Teams. You can have open shifts that people sign up and say, oh, you know what, I'd like to work on Thursday. Frontline workers are able to trade shifts as long as that's part of the company policy. So really what I want to play with this is anytime we have a volunteer event and we need volunteer coverage, I think this could streamline doing that just so much so. Just make it much, much faster and easier to do. And again, I have not, because I'm just not happening to be managing hourly scheduled workers, this is not something I've used a lot, but it seems like Microsoft is really putting a lot of development focus in this. For frontline workers, they were talking a lot about it in, say, healthcare settings where you need to make sure there's a lot of coverage. And it seems like it has really good functionality. The other thing that I have not used a lot that I saw them talking about at Ignite that looked really good is right now you can get planner integration with Teams, and that includes it's kind of like Trello. It's a Kanban methodology where you can have different tasks and you kind of drag them from left to right as they get completed, and you assign them to different people. Well, in the current version, you end up then having all these different teams with all your different Kanban boards and trying to keep track of what's where. They are bringing task roll-ups that's putting all of your different to-dos, your Microsoft reminders, different things that you're getting from different Kanban boards and Planner, and integrating that all into one place. So it'll all be under that Tasks app. So instead of jumping to multiple places to manage it, you'll be able to go into one place and see everything. And again, it's not something I've used a lot, but I was seeing how that could be a really convenient thing for teams collaborating. I think the reason we don't necessarily use it as extensively is most of the teams that I work with, if they need to do full-on project management, they're using Jira. And there are Jira integrations, but I think Microsoft would have to do a whole lot of functionality to have Jira out of the way. You know, it's kind of a pretty well-entrenched incumbent. Yes. So this was something that I was kind of, when I first saw it, I was not sure why they were putting development, like, okay, great, just like you can have Yammer and Teams in Yammer, they were putting a whole bunch of additional functionality around Teams within Outlook. And what I realized this really does, though, is we all have that manager who is never going to give up email, or who, you know, that leader who it is just what they do and how they work. Well, by having this integration with Outlook and letting people reply to Teams threads from Outlook, it's kind of one more way to get everybody collaborating in the same place. It's putting a different front end on the same functionality, and that makes it easier to just keep the conversation. That way the conversation isn't bouncing back and forth between, oh, some of it's in Teams and some of it's in Outlook. Nope, it all ends up in Teams together, regardless of how you choose to interact with it. Come on, advance. Who's a good slide? PowerPoint was doing so well, you all. Okay. And that is kind of the end of my walkthrough about how I keep myself organized in Teams, the features that I like, kind of the tips and tricks I've learned. Okay, at least it was the end of the deck when Microsoft got feisty. Whenever I was a little nervous. Some of these slides have videos in them. I'm like, okay, I have video streaming and I'm playing videos in my slides. Nate is recording the video and he's got a video going as well. And I have to say, until we got to that very end, it was really keeping up pretty well, which I almost went back in the day, you know, when one of the things that we spent so much energy trying to manage early on when web sharing was first coming out was how do you play video in presentations, and how does the leader have a video playing in his live stream of his town hall. I worked for an ag company, it was always a he, but the fact that I could throw all of this together and that Teams is keeping up with it is really a testament to how robust a tool it is. And, you know, this is just, I'm sitting in my spare bedroom office, and it is connected to Wi-Fi, and it is handling pretty much everything we throw at it. So, you know, if that doesn't speak to the engineering improvements that have happened, I'm not sure what would. So any questions?
Hey Tara, this is Chrissy again. Christine, this has been a really good session. I do have a general question. Actually, perhaps more or less, it's like a poll. When it comes to, let's say, if you want to draw attention to a particular either a file or folder. Yes, I said folder because there are proper uses of folders, right? You know, they're not completely evil, but but I digress. Of course, from within Teams, when you go to snag the link, of course, Teams gives you the prompt, copy the link to share in Teams, copy the link to share in SharePoint. Generally, the way that I make the decision is that if I'm actually just drawing it to attention to someone that's already a member of a team, I'll get the Teams link. But let's say if I want to draw it to someone that perhaps is not a member of the team and doesn't really need to be a member, but may find the information useful, I'll use the share the SharePoint link. Would I'm curious, what's your thoughts on that? Is there really a difference between the link with sharing the documents? Is it just matter it's arbitrary, or is it more or less like what I said, that if it's someone within already that's a team member, capital T, um, versus someone that is it's just a need to know. Yeah.
So what you described is exactly what I do as well. And it comes down to if you share the links in Teams, when they click the link, it'll open it in the in-app browser for Teams. Whereas if you share it in SharePoint, it'll open it in SharePoint. And we've got our permissions set up so that you can have a setting for permissions to have anybody in your company see it. And that seems to work better for me in SharePoint. I actually tend to like to open SharePoint and share the link out of SharePoint, because then I really, really know that I'm getting that. There's no additional Teams permissions that can mess it up. But I do exactly what you said, just because I want people, if someone isn't in Teams, even though I shared that file with them, I don't know if they're going to be able to get into that Teams. And Microsoft has gotten really good about permissions, but I still just use SharePoint when it's somebody not in the Teams.
Thanks, Sarah. That's good. Oh, I actually do have another question. This is actually just that came up recently. In fact, actually just today. And I actually tweeted out tagging not only Microsoft Teams, but also what I'm calling the Microsoft gurus, like Melissa, Matthew, and even Cariana. And I'm wondering, and I'm trying to figure out if it's something that is it just my teams, or is it something that I come across either a bug or anomaly. And the situation is I'm curious if either you, Tara, or Nate, or anyone else on the call has seen this. That of course, I'm a consultant, so I have a couple of clients that I collaborate with on their Teams tenant. So I'll toggle between them. I noticed that when I toggle to my client's Teams in the client app, the desktop app, the add a tab is not there. However, if I access the same team through the browser, and the browser is actually dev, Edge. So it works great on Edge. I love the new dev. Okay, I digress. The add a tab is there. So for some reason, it's not there on the desktop on though it's there, of course, on my own, team, because my own organization. So I'm wondering if you do toggle to an external team, if you've actually seen that.
Yeah. So as you're saying that, I noticed, so I'm a guest in a couple environments as well, and you're right, you can't add a tab. I couldn't open in SharePoint, and there were a couple other things that I couldn't do when I was added as a guest. And I had assumed that was how the administrator had set up her specific configuration, but I haven't tried it in a browser, and I'm on a MacBook. Are you in Windows or Mac?
Oh no, I'm in Windows, and but what I'm saying, it's there via the browser, so it's fine via the browser. So it's like, though it's not there on the desktop app.
I'm gonna have to go sign in. Nate, I'm a guest in your environment. I'm gonna have to go see if I can break it.
Sure.
Uh-oh. Yeah, so it's cool, and so far I haven't. Well, it was only a little while ago that I actually tweeted out, because I'm wondering if it's something that, did I just stumble upon a bug, or is it something that it's just in the settings? But it's weird that it's not. It's in it's fine in the browser, but not on the desktop app. Yeah.
And has anybody on the phone actually set up how guest access works for a tenant? Nate, I'm looking at you.
Yeah, I did briefly, just to get enough to make this work, but obviously I can't figure out even the chat thing, so I'm probably not your best resource.
Yet. Give you a week, you'll be fine.
Fingers crossed.
Has anybody else set that up, or? Honestly, at this point, anytime something strange happens, I just kind of like, software as a service, it'll change next week. But I'm very curious to see if I can replicate that. Because if I were an administrator and I found out that was, all the people had to do was open it in their browser to get all kinds of extra functionality, I'd want to know.
Exactly. Yeah, but feel free, and I'll keep you guys updated if I get any responses on my tweet, because I tagged the head honchos, Microsoft Teams, Cariano, Melissa, and Matthew, and then a general call to any Teams guru.
Yeah, I'll be curious. I just looked at a clock. Okay, see how I am not about to push the red button. I'm pushing the one beside the red button. I've learned. It is 10 o'clock, or 10 o'clock. It is 5 o'clock. Everybody, thank you so much for joining in. Thank you for your questions, and for those of you who chimed in with comments and good comments. And yeah, for sure. Thank you for coming. Nate, I will turn it back over to you for the official farewell.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Tara. That was a lot of really good stuff. And myself being someone new to Teams meetings and setting this up for the first time for LSPUG, it's been a journey, and I already took down some notes, things that I can hopefully do better to improve my use and also the experience of guests. And hopefully by the next time we do this, I'll figure out chat. So thank you, Chrissy, for letting us know that. And thank you to all of our attendees who tuned in.
And Nate, I will send you these slides in Teams, and you can make them available.
Oh, perfect. All right. And the recording will be posted for those of you who would like that. So have a great night, everybody, and we'll see you in January.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Enjoy the week.
Thanks, guys.